Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could spend a little bit of your day with us. For our first story today, just imagine an hours-long ride down the interstate, standing up and squeezed in next to someone you barely know. Well, that's way of life for the majority of cattle being moved from the feedlot to the harvesting facility. To lessen the stress on the animals and to help ensure a safe journey for all involved, National Beef Quality Assurance has developed a new BQA Transportation Program. Rob Eirich is the Nebraska Director of Beef Quality Assurance and an extension beef educator. He joined me to talk about the program and how you can become certified.
We're kind of looking at two different things. With feeder cattle, most of these cattle at least have been on the road in transit at least once in their lifetime, if not more. And so we're going to kind of talk about those. They're probably their final transportation piece, and those cattle will spend some time. They'll be brought up to those pens, and then from the pen next to the loadout chutes, they'll be sorted by different weights or even different numbers to go in different compartments of these trailers. And then a lot of these cattle, for feeder cattle, the average is 2.5 hours in transit, 130 to 150 miles. But when we start thinking about that's the average, when we did a 2016 audit with transportation, the average time was at 2.5, but the longest time on the road was up to 9 hours. And so these cattle then get put on these trucks and in their standing position for that duration of time. And then once they get to the plant, they'll be unloaded, put into holding pens, but those holding pens aren't really pens where they can relax and get comfortable because they will be started through the process fairly quickly. And so that time on the road really starts to stress those animals. It's that endpoint, something not familiar with them. And so you just get a lot add up to that. But also with market cows and bulls, you get the same type of situation, but the only thing is a lot of those plants are a lot farther away from these ranches where these animals are being called from, and so a longer distance of time kind of adds up there. And so there's just a lot of stress involved for both the driver, the handlers, and those people all the way through that process.
And Rob, what about bruising during transport? How does that affect the final product once it has reached the processing facility?
Well, there's a lot of situations. We had an increase of bruises. 39% of fed cattle had a bruise on them. And those bruises could be from improper handling. They could be facilities where they get overcrowded, they bump into sides and those type of things. It could be trailers that are inadequate in size because the frame size of our cattle have increased. And so those compartment heights are still the same as they've been. We're starting to see some modifications, but every time they bump or bruise or bump into anything or something hits them, they have a higher risk of bruising. And we look at bruises as being, 39%, but 77% of those are minor bruises where we have to trim out 1 pound of carcass weight, and that might be about the size of a deck of cards. Then there's 20% that are major, which is 1 to 10 pounds. Now, when we start talking about these bruises and how severe they are, a minor bruise, 1 pound or less of trim, is going to cost us $1.80. That was with 2016 numbers. And then the value in 2016, if we had a minor or a major bruise, we're talking $28 a carcass. And so each one of those bruises are starting to cost us. So we have to look at how we can use some low stress, effective handling of these animals to make sure we don't get those high risk of bruising situations through that whole process.
Okay. So I'd like to learn a bit more about the new Beef Quality Assurance Transportation Program. What's new here? What's already been working? And what do you want to continue with the program?
Well, in February of 2018, the National Beef Quality Assurance Program put together a brand new training program for transporters, both the farmer rancher, but also our professional drivers. And it all comes down to best management practices. And we go through this process from planning out that travel time to plan out, what our densities are per compartment in that load and how we handle these cattle with the least amount of stress. But also, we talk about these extremes as we discuss weather extremes, making sure we're not sitting and waiting and those type of things as well. And so when you look at that, this new program really focuses on all of those pieces, and it was really designed from a group of people, not only in transportation, but producers, experts in the area of animal handling, and some of our packers are involved as well. And so we looked at all the areas to really help these drivers. And so when we talk about doing the training and getting them on board, we've done this in the past, but not quite as put together in a real nice format as we have now, where they can do it online or in person.
And you mentioned the best management practices. Anything else you want to speak on as to how that relates with the new BQA Transportation Program? Anything else we need to know here?
One of the pieces that we really focus on is making sure they have kind of a pre-trip plan and kind of go through that whole process. But with that, those best management practices and having that documentation of what their plan is and what they're hauling and all that paperwork, it's also going to help them in any case of working with the carrier enforcement, DOT, State Patrol as well, in any situation they might encounter emergency-wise, or in case of a situation where they might have an issue where the truck or drivers put out of service on that side of things too. But again, pretty important to have all those best management practices in place because they are a very integral part of our industry.
For more information, you can check out bqa.unl.edu. Moving on to our next story now, and an illness or disability doesn't have to mean your farming career is over. Nebraska AgrAbility has been around since 1995, helping people overcome those barriers and continue to thrive in agriculture. Dr. Yoder from the Nebraska AgrAbility team came on the show to talk more about it and tell us about a National AgrAbility Workshop happening later this month.
So AgrAbility is a great program that I've worked with for quite a while now, but the main goal of it is to help farmers that have any sort of disability get back into farming safely. We know the farming population's going to get back into farming whatever way they can and make whatever modifications they need to their equipment. But this is a USDA-funded project that comes through the Farm Bill that allows us to evaluate farming operations and recommend assistive technology, and then hook them up with the funding sources that will allow them to afford some of the assistive technology to do whatever they need to, whether it's getting in and out of the cab of a tractor or moving around the farm better and feeding animals. So there's a wide variety of assistive technology that we can recommend to help them continue farming safely and prevent further injuries.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. I think it's really important to hammer that home. It's not just for farmers with accident disabilities on the farm. You serve lots of other folks too.
Right. Most of the people we work with, automobile accidents are a very big thing. A lot of spinal cord injuries and severe injuries like that may put them in a wheelchair, but we can help them continue farming. Other injuries, hunting injuries. So I would say some of the smaller injuries, like amputations, if you want to call that a smaller injury,
Sure,
are the ones that are caused in agriculture. Most of the more severe paralyzing injuries were outside of agriculture.
And I understand that if special equipment is needed or if the farming operation needs to be changed a little bit, the farmer isn't going to have to shoulder that entire cost by themselves, right?
Correct. So our funding from USDA doesn't allow us to provide funding for that, but we can connect them with services like Voc Rehab and some very affordable loan programs to help afford some of that assistive technology.
And a big reason you're here, we've got the 2019 AgrAbility National Training Workshop coming up later this month. It's billed as the premier training event addressing issues of disability in agriculture. So when someone comes to that event, what can they expect?
Right, so we have people all over the United States and even a few international visitors that do similar work there. They come to this and present what they found to work in their areas and regions. We have a lot of farmers. So there's a lot of farmer support groups there that can encourage people that may have disabilities, how they can adapt their operations to continue farming successfully. A lot on different varieties of agriculture that they can do. So maybe not what we think of as traditional agriculture, but higher value crops sometimes play a role there, or specialty animals. So learning about different farming practices, where you can find help, and the type of help that's available out there.
Any speakers or highlights you want to mention at this year's workshop?
Sure. Many of you may have heard of Gus Gustafson from the Omaha area that lost his arm and injured a leg in a farming accident when he was a young kid. Now he's a motivational speaker from that area, and he'll be one of the speakers at the conference.
To learn more about AgrAbility or to register for this month's conference, head over to agrability.unl.edu. It's time now for this week's trivia question, and it's about 4-H. We love 4-H here on Market Journal. Here's the question. Which of these choices is one of the H's in 4-H? Is it happiness, hands, harvest, or maybe it's D, Huskers? Make your selection, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. And how's this for some more H words? Heifers, hooves, and hogs. It's time for this week's market report. Today we're breaking down the numbers from the annual cattle inventory report. And spring is just around the corner, but this fierce winter has taken its toll on cattle producers. And the African swine flu is an ocean away, but could the disease have any impacts here at home? We'll talk about all that and more with Dr. Lee Schulz. He's a livestock economist with Iowa State University, and he joins us now. And starting off, the annual cattle inventory report, it's a highly anticipated report that was released several days ago. What are some of the high points on that report that you like to hit?
Well, I think first and foremost, it was, for the most part, as expected. We've seen inventories larger in the categories that we expected larger. So the all cattle and calves number was larger. This was the 5th consecutive year in a row of that, so really continued that expansionary phase there. Beef cow numbers were 1% higher. Dairy cow numbers were about 1% lower. Maybe the surprise in the report, if you could find one, was the heifers for beef cow replacement. So these would be the heifers that will be entering as beef cow numbers. That number was expected smaller, actually about 4.3% smaller, and only we've seen it 3% smaller. So it was 1% difference in the expectations compared to the actual. I think that really resulted from markets are a little bit better than we kind of anticipated, I think, as we've seen markets shape up for 2009. Calf and feeder cattle prices look to hold. Fed cattle prices still remain relatively strong. So I think maybe that caused producers to hold on to a few more heifers than maybe we thought they would have the last couple of months. We've seen relatively strong replacement heifer prices. So I think we had an indication that that number wasn't going to really fall off as much as maybe it could have.
And then taking what we know with this report and the other reports that came out in February, does that change how producers need to approach their marketing decisions in the coming months?
I don't think too much has changed, and really it's because when we seen the government shutdown and kind of delay of those reports, what was still being released was the price reporting of that data, and so we didn't really miss any of the price discovery in that process. What we're catching up on is now a lot of the production data, but I think that is pretty in line with where we expected it to be as we see that data filter in. I would remind really producers, regardless of what we pick up in these trends, that your marketing plan really should be to reduce risk, and that is to limit losses and increase the probability of a profit. So how can you do that? Really, it's controlling what you can control on your farm. So it's your farm's costs as well as your price risk management plan. And so when there's opportunities for profits, like we see in cattle feeding right now for the first really 6-7 months of 2019, I think it's an opportunity there to hedge those prices, to put some protection in the form of price floors through options to really increase that probability of a profit. We see similar scenario for the hog industry. Really, May through October look to be seasonally higher prices as well as profitable prices for those operations.
All right, good advice for sure. And moving on to weather, here in Nebraska, we're expecting it to get warmer one of these days. I know it's been brutal for you guys in Iowa as well. Could you give us some insight into what impacts the weather is having on the cattle market and what we could still see?
Well, I think we are seeing some impact when you look at animal performance with the cold weather, and really I think now as it maybe starts to heat up a little bit, you're going to see to deal with the wet weather as well. And so animal performance, I think there's an impact. I think you could say that cattle weights have been at least curbed, and so we maybe didn't see the heights of the weights we could have seen if weather would have been a little bit better. And so that has impacted the amount of beef production a little bit. I think really the big impact that we did see was on one, placement decision. So I think given the polar vortex we've seen, I think we did see some auction markets close. We've seen less ability to transport that animals. And so I think that's backed up with the cattle inventory report that said those feeder cattle supplies are larger. And so I think they're sitting on farms right now looking to go to feedlots. We're likely to see some placement numbers really ramp up here the next couple of months. And so that could pressure feeder cattle prices some.
Yeah, always blame it on the polar vortex for sure. You touched on hogs a second ago. I wanted to get back to that, and specifically African swine fever. And this has been causing a lot of trouble for China's pork industry. Could you give us an update on that and how that could have any ripple effects over here in the U.S. market possibly?
So we continue to get bits of information out of China and routine updates of both new cases as well as how they're dealing with the ongoing cases. And really there's been a lot of numbers thrown out there of about 100 million hogs impacted in China, or at least removed from the Chinese herd for the first year of the impact. I think really right now where prices are in China, there hasn't been a real noticeable impact, but it's likely to occur as we get into the second and third quarter, where really there's going to be a hole in that pork production. I think it's going to be really key to see how consumers react to that in China, because with that hole in production, prices will be larger, will be higher, and if demand remains where it's at, that means that prices will maintain at those levels. Now, if demand wanes a little bit, you could see prices not escalate to the levels that we think. And if demand wanes enough, we could not maybe see even much of a price inflation impact in China.
All right, Dr. Lee Schulz, we appreciate it. We'll do it again real soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Scott Brown from the University of Missouri. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask Scott, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. And before we end the markets today, check out this story. Last month, the Schaff Angus Valley's annual production sale smashed the price record for a bull on the auction block. The bull is named America and sold for a staggering $1.5 million to Herbster Angus Farms of Fall City, Nebraska. Last year, the Schaff Angus Valley set a sales record on the purchase of a bull that sold for $800,000. America was just $90,000 shy of doubling that record, and the big guy also set the record for 205-day weaning weight, tipping the scales at 1,107 pounds. America has been described as standing out since day one. That's one patriotic bull. Moving on now, and in May 2018, growers in the Nebraska Panhandle dealt with extensive damage when 80 to 90 mile-per-hour straight-line winds swept through the region. The storm left center pivots upended and sheds and grain bins torn apart. Father and son Nick and Nicholas Lapisotis, who farm near Bridgeport, lost 21 pivots that day. 2 were new pivots they had recently installed using low-energy precision application or LIPA systems on. The Lapisotises have used LIPA systems since 2014, and when they had to replace center pivots that had been upended, they took a good look at which fields might be candidates for the technology. Read more about these LIPA systems in the March Nebraska Farmer. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, we are about a week and a half away from the first day of spring. Please tell us that we have seen our last cold blast for a while.
Well, Troy, it has been a very terrible February, and we followed up with bad conditions here the first full week of March. We had the Arctic air come in after our snow system last weekend. 2 days of very frigid weather across the state. We started to see a warming trend on Wednesday. only to follow it up with a wave moving across the center part of the state and dropping anywhere from 2 to upwards of 7.5 inches of snowfall from the area just to the north of North Platte all the way over to the Lincoln-Omaha metro area and into Iowa. And then, of course, the system that started to move into the state yesterday evening is now basically on top of us. We've seen the temperature slowly rise. We're dealing with some rain on top of the snow, and then we're going to see a changeover as the day progresses. And then yet we deal with another system next week that potentially has even more significant rainfall with us. So the flash flood watches will probably be issued with the system on Tuesday, and we're likely to see some localized runoff issues as we progress through the next few days. So if we look at the upper air model, the system that's currently impacting us is starting to move rapidly toward the Great Lakes. It should end by the middle of the day to the early afternoon hours as it passes well to our east. The surface low now is in south central Wisconsin. That's going to pull significant moisture to the east of us and accumulating snow up into the portions of Minnesota, Wisconsin, with just the northeastern part of the state having the best area for accumulating snow with this event. Then that system moves off on Sunday. We get a break, we get a little warming. We see city temperatures in the upper 20s to lower 30s statewide. As high pressure is temporarily in control, but we do have a low pressure that's going to be forming in the southwest, and it's going to start to move its way. So we do get one break here on the second half of the weekend, and then we see this deep vesh of moisture starting to come into our region, and it looks like that moisture will arrive as we get into Monday afternoon into Monday evening across the state. That's going to bring a lot of warmth into our region, and we're going to start to see the precipitation stream northward, especially as we get into the day on Tuesday, as we have a straight north flow from the jet, or straight south flow to north flow from the jet, bringing in copious moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Surface low develops in Texas. This generally looks like it's going to be a pretty significant weather maker. Thunderstorm development is possible along the front. Precipitation 1 to 2 inches likely across the southern 1/3 of the state, and then we see this low basically move up as we get into the day on Wednesday to central Minnesota with the surface low basically underneath of it. That's going to stagnate somewhat and keep us in the precipitation bands as we see accumulating snowfall heavy at times across the eastern Dakotas, potentially into northeast Nebraska, and the rainfall moves off to our east as we start to see a trough that associated with this start to shift the systems to our east, and we will start to see high pressure trying to fill in behind it, particularly as we go the day on Thursday. It looks like a little accumulating snow to the north of us, but the primary heavy precipitation moves to our southeast, and this trough stagnates for a couple of days in the upper Midwest. That's going to keep conditions a little bit cooler than normal, but we're not looking at Arctic air at this standpoint, and basically high pressure moves in, and it may lead us to a fairly dry period in the extended forecast as most of the precipitation moves off to the eastern seaboard. So as we look even farther, the 8 to 14 day forecast next Thursday, the following Tuesday, does indicate below normal temperatures, although it will be above freezing on several occasions, and a drier trend. So Troy, if we can get by this week, it looks like at least we have a little bit of light at the tunnel. Watch out for some of the flash flooding with these 2 precipitation events.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, which of these choices is one of the H's in 4-H? Well, give yourself a hand if you guessed hands. B is the correct answer. The other 3 H's are head, heart, and health. For our final story today, the Nebraska Rural Response Hotline is there to help if you've got a problem big or small. Services, including legal advice, family counseling, financial paperwork, and more, are all just a phone call away. Michelle Soll has worked for the hotline since the 80s and has answered thousands of calls in her time there. Market Journal spoke with her to learn more about the hotline and what you can do if you need help.
Well, the hotline started back in the 80s, of the farm crisis of the 80s. And since then, we've been doing a lot of work, estate and transition planning, working on financial distress cases. We have a farm law attorney and financial advisor statewide. And we offer a lot of free services to our farmers and ranchers. Especially in this time, farmers and ranchers don't have an abundance of money, and they don't want to spend it on things other than within the farm operation. So free services are wonderful because they're getting to talk to a farm law attorney free of charge. They're getting to go, we have a stress counseling program called Comet. They get to go get counseling if they need help. A lot of people are starting to see some family dynamic issues. So they're having to go to counseling. So we pay for like 5 sessions of counseling then. So it's just really important that we try to take care of their needs, their human needs. Oh, we have an array of reasons that people might call, particularly like some people might have calls about a fence line dispute, or they want to do estate and transition planning, our contract dispute. Lately we've been seeing a lot of creditor-debtor issues, so a lot of debt collection. and how to go about the process of maybe trying to put together another plan within your farm operation. And then, I mean, we just have a lot, and then legal aid itself is actually the one that houses the Rural Response Hotline, and they put together and they write additional grants to offer more services, such as the Beginning Farmer Program. Well, you know, there is a lot of transitioning going on. We're trying to get a lot of these beginning farmers going and trying to put together successful plans for these beginning farmers. It's a tough time to transition, but we have a lot of retiring and older landowners that are running and are willing to transfer the land onto the beginning farmers. So we're trying to work through a lot of transition plans and family dynamic issues to make that happen successfully. We have a lot of wonderful partners that make all of this happen, and that's what people don't realize. I think we're very rare that way in our state. The Nebraska Department of Agriculture helps finance our farm finance clinics, which are one-on-one, and that we work with them through the farm mediation program, and we do some financial advising with them, some financial preparing. And then we have the Health and Human Services that contributes to our counseling program called COMET. COMET stands for Counseling, Outreach, Mental Health Therapy, and it's a way for a person to go out and seek counseling with a licensed provider, and it's just to kind of help them through a tough time. You know, you could be working through even transition, and you could run into family dynamic issues, or right now you could be seeing a lot of financial distress, and you don't know where to turn, and things like that. So people are really utilizing the COMET program. Oh, my message is just to we're there for them if they ever feel they'll need us, or if they know anybody that could need us, just to pass our phone number on, and that we'll be there for anybody who could use any part of our services, even if it's just a legal question, you know, like, hey, I have a water issue, or I have a fence line dispute, anything like that, you know, not just the financial distress, but other issues too.
They do wonderful work at the Rural Response Hotline. We definitely encourage you to reach out if you'd like to take advantage of any of their services. That's going to do it for this week's show. I did want to mention, be sure and check out our YouTube and social media channels for an exclusive web-only story about a woman I spoke with who is using her platform as a farmer, author, and activist to make farming accessible to everyone. It's a really cool story. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.